So thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for your invitation to come here and present this paper. My name is João Oliveira, and I'm going to present the paper on technological change, earnings inequality in the United States, implications for optimal taxation, which is joint work with Pedro Brinca, João Duarte, and Hans Holter. So the motivation for this paper is really the rising earnings inequality and technological change that we observe in the US and elsewhere. So these charts over here show us this phenomenon for the US, which has been, widely documented in recent years. So on the left-hand side, you've got the variance of log earnings pre-tax. So there's an increase in earnings or labor income inequality, which rises almost linearly through time. And on the right-hand side, you have one candidate explanation for this phenomenon, which is one kind of technological change. So here we see you see the relative price of equipment investment goods, which is falling. This is a long-winded way of saying that computers are becoming better. So we have better computers, better MRI machines, better airplanes, you name it. So there's going to be some types of occupations that are going to be more complementary with these types of technologies than others. Again, this has been widely thought about. There's a large literature on this, and in that literature talks about how wages, so that's hourly wages, will disperse between different occupations on the basis of the complementarity that they have with computers. So that means that us economists will become more productive because they're better computers. Okay, that's one possible explanation. Or that, doctors will become, medical doctors will become better at what they do because they have better MRI machines. And this is actually what you see in the data. So over here you see the solid blue line is what is called non-routine cognitive occupations. So that is economists and medical doctors and engineers and so forth. And you see that their wage premium has been increasing at least since the early 80s. It has increased by 55 percentage points compared to, say, assembly workers, routine, manual, so occupations that are routine and manual in nature. So like I said, there's a relatively large literature on this. What we bring to the table is to bring this all together in a general equilibrium model with inequality. So we can answer the question whether this source of technological change or other sources of technological change can actually account for this in a general equilibrium model with inequality. That's the first question. Now, the second question is what are the implications that this has for optimal progressivity of the tax system? So you see a lot of politicians saying, oh my God, inequality is rising, we must immediately increase the progressivity of the tax system, right? So that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at in a very, very simple way. But those are the questions that we have in this paper. So how are we going to go about this? So we have a theory linking the rise of the non-routine, of the wages of the non-routine cognitive occupations based on the seminal paper of Otter et al., 2003. The basic story is that you've got the price of equipment investment goods going down. That leads to greater capital accumulation, so greater demand by firms of for these types of occupations, so more firms demanding engineers because they have better computers. So this is an old story. And this thereby rises the wages of those occupations relative to other occupations because these are more complementary than the other occupations. So this is what drives the increase in inequality. And the question is whether, this all works out in general equilibrium. So if you have a quantitative model that has these mechanisms on there, whether this generates this type of behavior. So for example, why is this not just eliminated by an increase in labor supply in these occupations, for example? That's one way to look at it. So we start from a standard incomplete markets model. And we add once and for all occupational choice between 4 types of occupations, which include the occupation which we think, or the occupation type which we think is driving all of this quantitatively. Then we had 3 types of technological change. So we have the type of technological change I showed you before, better computers, but we also have 2 other types, TFP and labor augmenting technological change. So the key thing here, so the first contribution is, of course, in order to use this type of model for a policy analysis and for a quantitative analysis, we've got to estimate some of these parameters, namely the elasticities between equipment capital, the shares that occupations have in production, etc. So we need to estimate the production function. We need all of these elasticities and shares. So essentially, what we do is we expand Corv 2000, which is the seminal paper on this, to have, instead of college education, we have occupations, 4 different types of occupations, and we estimate all of these elasticities using their method. And today we have with us one of the authors of said paper. So I hope I don't put my foot in my mouth or something. And then obviously we need to estimate these. These technological processes. Otherwise, a model, doesn't make much sense. So what do we find? So that's the method in our first contribution. What we find is that the model can fully account for the increase in the variance of labor earnings, essentially. That's result number 1. And this comes, so 2/3 comes from investment-specific technological change, better computers. 1/2 comes from labor augmenting technological change, which you can think of as better math theorems that make mathematicians more productive, or make us more productive because we can find fixed points faster or something like that. This doesn't add up to 1 because there are interactions, and therefore when you have both, you actually have 100%. So yeah, that's the explanation I just gave you. We find that the increase in the supply of economists is not enough to offset this increase in the wage premium of non-routine cognitive occupations. And the second finding is our third and final contribution, which is we find that optimal progressivity, even though inequality is rising, we find that optimal progressivity drops 2/3 from 1980 to 2015. And this is solely due to investment-specific technological change. So this is one of the points of the paper, which is you need to look at the origin of the rising inequality to know what exactly you should do. So it doesn't necessarily follow that, inequality is rising, you should redistribute. Now, this has been explored previously in the literature, in some older literature, but we do this in a quantitative model. Actually, labor augmenting technological choice and TFP pull in the other direction. So they point into the increase in the progressivity of the labor income tax system. So why is this the case? So when you raise progressivity, this is theoretically, of course, when you raise progressivity, you're actually affecting 3 things. First of all, by raising progressivity, you are essentially taxing the people in the economy that save more, that contribute more to the capital stock. And when you raise progressivity, these people, they have less disposable income, they save less, and therefore the stock of capital drops, output drops, consumption drops, and therefore you are lowering welfare because of that. Now, there are 2 other channels. By raising progressivity, you're also reducing inequality in marginal utility of consumption. So what you're doing is essentially you're taking from Bill Gates and giving that money to a starving man, and you're raising welfare because there's dispersion in marginal utility of consumption. So that's the second channel. Finally, you've got the uncertainty channel. So the progressive tax system is, of course, an insurance system. And when you raise progressivity, you're increasing redistribution and you're lowering, let's say, the time series risk that households in the economy face. So you've got these 3 channels. So what matters for our result is how technology affects technological change affects these three things. And what you see is that investment-specific technological change actually tilts all three channels in favor of flatter taxes. Some of these, I believe, more than others. But let's start with those. So one is that, as with investment-specific technological change, that means better computers. In the future, or rather in the present, compared to 1980, you've got more bang for your buck, right? So when you save $1, you buy more computing power with that dollar now than you do in 1980, right? So when you raise taxes and you disincentivize saving, you reduce output by more, right? So if investment-specific technological change increases this elasticity, so it makes progressivity have a larger impact, higher progressivity have a larger negative impact on output. But also there's another channel, which is the channel that has to do with the complementarity of non-routine cognitive occupations, in particular, with capital. So when you lower capital because you're increasing progressivity, you are reducing also the productivity of these occupations by more relative to 1980. So that's one channel, right? One channel telling you to flatten the progressivity of your tax system. Now, this second channel, which is the inequality channel, is quite a bit of fun, at least from my point of view. So here's how this works out. Yeah. You can do a whole lot of things with that. But what we're doing is is kind of a classic optimal progressivity exercise. But I agree with you. The price of investment.
We should not distort relative prices just because we want to redistribute. There's not too little investment.
No, I don't say. So this is just the labor income tax system. So you don't tax capital, if that's what you're asking. So this is just, there's a bunch of people and they have to pay labor income taxation, and it's distortionary.
To smooth out distortions more across tax margins. But I doubt that you want to subsidize capital so as to reduce the distortionary impact of your labor tax.
Yeah, that's one possible. It could be. So, yeah, I really can't answer that question.
Basically, your point is that if I tax IT workers, it is more distortionary because investment falls more, at least than if I tax raw labor.
Well, it's kind of that, but it's basically if you tax rich people, independently of where they work, the stock of capital will drop. That's one thing. The second thing is because the stock of capital will drop and it is super complementary with one type of workers, namely IT workers, it will drop even further. And this has even further compared to the 1980s.
When there are more IT workers, when there are more,
Because now they're the same level of complementarity, but basically their marginal productivity drops by more, becomes more sensitive now relative to the 1980s. Sure. Oh, I'm sorry about that. So it's essentially the curvature of your progressive income tax system. So the more concave it is, as opposed to the flatter it is, the more redistributive it is. The objective function, well, in our case, is to maximize the expected utility of a household who does not yet know whether it is a doctor, surgeon, or a farm worker. So the usual utilitarian thing. I'm sorry for not explaining that. But this is the second bit, and then I'll move on, which is the following. So when you are changing the progressivity of the tax system in a model where you have you have occupations, irrespective of what your occupations actually are, not only are you redistributing directly income between agents through taxes and transfers, but you're also affecting their occupational choice, right? And when you tax higher income occupations, which are the non-routine cognitive occupations, a lot of those agents are going to move from those occupations down the ladder, right? And when they do that, they're going to reduce the marginal productivity of the people working in those occupations. So a rather extreme example, if I raise taxes on a surgeon, he will then decide to become an Uber driver, right? This is an extreme example just to make a point. And he will then lower the wages on those occupations. You see?
But you do observe, though, is that in France, the highest tax on earth, the surgeons don't work that hard.
We also have that.
3 hours a day. They don't become Uber drivers, but
okay, that's true. We also have that. So we have the intensive margin. But yeah, I was really surprised by this. I hadn't thought about it. But yeah. Then you have basically our model predicts higher return rates. That is more, I'm a little cooler on this result. But basically, because there are higher return rates, the insurance value of the progressive income tax system, is lower now than it was in the 80s, and therefore, it calls for a flatter tax. I'm less keen on this result, but it's something we have. Actually, when you do this occupation by occupation, the only ones that want a progressive tax system are the highest paid. And the reason is that progressive taxation acts as a barrier of people coming into their occupations, which is something I thought was rather cool.
it explains Bill Gates and
Sorry?
it explains Bill Gates and Davos and all this.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't know whether this is actual fact, but it's rather fun that it has. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Your model predicts falling wealth inequality.
Falling wealth inequality.
The rich save less, the poor save more. It sounds like falling.
I can't really say because we didn't do a lot on the wealth side.
Well, to the extent it matters for your taxation results.
But I mean, definitely, it definitely matters. So I can't say that this is an absolute result. We try to do the wealth bit, especially with by bringing in market power and rising markups, but we weren't really successful in doing that. So we didn't really take that bit of the model super seriously. But it's definitely a good point. There's a paper that actually does this with the wealth bit really well done, but with the occupation bit less developed than we do, which just came out, which is basically it's Moll, Restrepo, and Racial, and they do that bit. I'm not sure what happens there, but I can check and get back to you. So the bottom line is what I said. So not only does the progressive income tax system redistributes directly when you take from one person and give to another, but it also does so through wages, which is, at least in my view, really cool. And this is critically changed by technology. So technology changes this relationship quite a lot. So, there's a position in the literature. I won't go through all of that, but just to say that what we do is basically we bring our occupations into all of these kinds of models that talk about this, starting from Greenwood, Herkowitz, and Crucell 97 and Corv 2000. We also contribute to this task-based framework, which is getting a lot of attention in the recent years, but we do so in much more stylized way. And we also have this optimal taxation and technology literature. Heathcote, Letton, Violante. Here, what we do is we have the discrete occupational choice rather than the human capital accumulation, and we have a detailed treatment of inequality when compared, for example, with Guerreiro, Rebelo, and Teller's 2023. So the plan for this talk is to go through the model of tech change and occupational choice, and then answer question 1 and then answer question 2. So not really a complex plan. So, just to remind you, we take an OLG incomplete markets model with a production function of 4 occupations, investment specific, all the sources of technological changes that I just mentioned, and a once and for all occupational choice based on expected utility and idiosyncratic costs. Right? So this means that if you become a taxi driver, you can't at age 50 go to surgeon school or something like that. So this is fair. I think this is a reasonable assumption. So I won't go through this because it's just a repetition of what I just said. So an important thing here is that, we build a tractable model which has all of these inequality details, but it is quite computationally challenging because you have all of these occupations. So we're still working on the transition. So the results that you're going to see are results for steady state comparison, but we're working on those now. So, yes. Price of equipment is exogenous. Yeah. Agree 100%. Yeah. Thanks. Really the limit is just computational to what we can do. But I agree 100%. Yeah. Sure. No. Yeah. You think that the challenge is, well, yeah, maybe you're right. Okay, great. So then, yeah, we can talk about. Okay, we can talk about co-authorships at a future date. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think that's really useful. So just to talk about. So we don't have a lot of time because I got a little carried away there. But just to say that this thing has 3 blocks: production, households, and government. Productions. This is fairly standard. I'll just mention that you've got final goods production, you've got intermediate goods production. This is pretty standard. Investment. Just to tell you where the sources of technological change come from. You have these final goods that are being produced with linear technologies. The only difference really is the equipment investment good, which is less than directly proportional. In the level technology is 1 over xi relative to the multiplied by the number of inputs. So as xi t drops, goods are produced with the same level of inputs. That means, and that allows us basically to write the level of to relate the level of technology to the relative price of investment goods, which is what you saw in the first chart. In the second chart, where you saw that dropping through time, which means that investment-specific technological changes are actually rising. Sorry. Then you have the production of intermediate goods. That's where the production function actually is. The production function, which is the most interesting one, of course. There you have the capital, you have equipment, then you have structures, and then you have the different occupation types, which are 4 of them. Here, non-routine cognitive, non-routine manual, routine cognitive, and routine manual. So surgeons, cooks, I think clerks, typists, etc. And then you have the assembly workers. And what we do is to combine this into a production function, which essentially, there you have TFP, you have structures, then you have structures as a Cobb-Douglas, and with a nested CES where you have the routine manual outside, then you have a composite, actually a summation of composites between capital equipment and the other three occupations, which are inside. Now you have capital occupation complementarity if the elasticity of a given composite is lower than the elasticity of substitution between equipment capital and routine manual labor. And then you have these N's, which are the labor inputs, and these are the multiplication between hours and an efficiency index, which is the labor augmenting technological change. So these are, better food recipes for cooks, better math theorems for us, and, that sort of stuff.
There are only two kinds of labor inputs.
There are 4 kinds of labor inputs.
Yeah, but don't you lump 3 of them into O?
So there are 3 different composites between capital equipment and each of these occupations. So this is a summation. So there will be a total of 4 elements there. So this is the household bit, pretty standard. I won't go through that. Just to say on the occupational choice, where you basically the idea that we have is this, and this is something that I find there are different ways to deal with this. There's sort of a subtlety here. So you have at age 20, you take out a set of random draws, kappa O, so 4 draws for each of the occupations, which are basically the cost or benefit, because you can have a lot of joy being an economist that, highly exceeds the tuition cost you actually pay. So you have 4 costs of joining each of the occupations, and then what you basically do is you look at the expected value of joining each of the 4 occupation, and you join that with the cost or benefit of joining each occupation, and you just select the maximum, right? So this is really important because what we're doing here is occupational choice, but what we're not doing is selection. So this is before people know that they're going to be good at a particular profession, they just look at, what's the average wage of that profession. So this is rather important what you do here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to give people the information about how good they are in a given occupation. Whether this makes sense or not, that's a question that we can discuss. Anyway, food for thought.
What do you do here? So I guess the same kind of capital fell, the cost of becoming an NRC increased dramatically.
The cost.
Like going to college.
We are going to calibrate that to match the shares of the shares of these different occupations. Yeah. So what we do is okay. So we've got we've got the dispersion in. So we've got the different wage premium, right? So that's fixed. That we know what that is in 2015, and then we adjust the relative costs of joining each occupation to match the occupational shares. That's basically what we do. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about that. So I can. Yeah. Okay. Let me think about that. But yeah, sure. Thanks. So because we're running out of time, I'll just go to the results because the rest of the model is super standard. Oh, sure. Sorry. I mean, we started out with the 4, And it's a good question. Is maybe there would be some way to simplify the model by just considering non-routine cognitive occupations and just lumping all the rest of them into one, because that's where the wage premium is really high. So yeah, that's something we could think about. So thanks for that. Yeah, so let me just move on to results. So first question, how did technological change affect earnings inequality, right? So the goal here is to measure the contribution of each channel to the change in the variance of pre-tax log earnings from 1980 to 2015. So what we're going to do is we calibrate the model to 1980. I didn't share that because we don't have that much time. We calibrate the model to that date. And then we're going to recalibrate the model to 2015 by changing technology, taxation, and skill acquirement costs, right? So we just changed those parameters. And then we compute the change in variance of log earnings, which we're going to call the baseline prediction of the model. So there's basically, we just calculate the difference between the variance of log earnings in 2015 and 1980. And then we're going to set some sets of parameters back to the 1980 value to see how that affects the prediction. So if the prediction completely disappears, that means that that parameter is super important in the prediction of the increase in the variance of log earnings. So that's what you see in this chart, right? So you've got two bars, the observed, so what you get from the data, and then the baseline prediction of the model, right? So it increased about 28% inequality, increased 28%, labor income inequality increased 28%, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is steady state. So we're working on this transition, but we're not there yet. This is true. This is true. So that's why. Agreed. So.
Yes, the incentives to change occupations that occurred along the way. So in that sense.
Agreed. That's true. That's true. Yeah. So, but we do a bunch of. So, just to tell you that the model as it is now is able to quantitatively generate this sort of movement, and then we try to investigate. Well, why is this, right? So we have then 4 bars, which is employment, total factor productivity, capital income, taxation, and progressivity as well. And what we find is that this has very little impact quantitatively in this variable. So it doesn't employment. I'm sorry, I should have explained that. So these are the employment shares. Basically, we take we change the costs of joining each occupation. Right? That's what we do. But then we bring it back to 1980, right? And that has no impact on the prediction of the model. I mean, no quantitatively relevant impact. So our prediction is not being driven by that. What it is being driven by is technology. So there you have labor augmenting technological change. When you get rid of that, or rather when you put that to the 1980 value, you get half of the increase in earnings inequality that you would get with it. And then when you set investment-specific technological change, that drops to 2/3. When you get rid of technological change altogether, the entire prediction of the model, the prediction of the model disappears. You actually have a slight reduction in inequality from 1980 to 2015. Then you have the data on wage premium. I won't go through that because we don't have sufficient time to do so. Now, as to the second question, how does technological change affect optimal progressivity of the tax system? I'm sorry. We're going to do a welfare decomposition a la Flodin 2001. So that means that we calculate optimal welfare using the progressivity of the tax system, so the curvature, and we try to find what maximizes welfare in this economy, right? That's the first thing. Then we're going to use this method to try to understand the different channels by which welfare is being maximized. So that's pretty standard. So just to remind you, there's efficiency. So when you increase progressivity, you reduce saving and output. Then there's inequality. So when you increase progressivity, you increase transfers to agents with marginal utility of consumption. So you take away from Bill Gates to give it to a starving man on the street. And then you have the uncertainty channel. You increase progressivity and you lower the volatility of consumption. So that increases welfare. So what do you find? So let's start from 1980 and do this decomposition. So the welfare curve, x-axis shows theta 1, which is the level of progressivity, right? So when you go to the right, when you increase theta 1, you're increasing progressivity. Theta 1, you're increasing progressivity. So the welfare curve, so welfare, is the solid blue line, right? And then you have each of the three channels I just mentioned plotted on there. So optimal progressivity in 1980 was 0.15. In actuality, it was 0.19. Is there a question? No. Okay, sorry. So let's start with the level channel. Unsurprisingly, so when you increase progressivity, you drop this. This channel is downward sloping because you're reducing saving and investment and output. The other two are increasing in progressivity because you're because of the reasons I just explained. That's it, right? So then you do the recalibration of the model to 2015, and bang, you go from a 0.15 optimal progressivity to a 0.05 optimal progressivity. So close to a flat tax, definitely a flatter tax. So what's happening here, right? So it's the story I told at the beginning. So saving in 2015 compared to 1980 is much more efficient in producing output because of technological change, because of complementarity with non-routine cognitive occupations. And as you see here, it tilts the answer we get in terms of welfare and optimality towards flatter taxes. So the 2015, can you see the blue solid line is the 2015 calibration, and then the dashed red line is the 2015 calibration where there was no investment-specific technological change. Sure. So investment-specific technological change enters into the model as the price of investment, as the price of buying investment goods, right? And that goes. No. Yeah, it's just a level change. So households wake up in 2015. It's like, oh my God, the price of a computer has dropped incredibly by 60%. Right, so that's how it works, and then this goes into a fund. There's a no arbitrage condition, and basically affects the return rate on capital. Yes, exactly. Yeah, there are two categories of final goods. So there's investment, there's equipment investment. There's then the other final goods which have a constant price between themselves, which is basically structures, the consumption good, etc. Yeah. Okay, so this tilts this basically tilts but it increases the slope. So when you reduce progressivity in 2015, you get more bang for your buck, so you get more capital stock for the same amount of same dollar amount. And the other thing, Excel. With the overall, we do. So that's how we clear the budget constraint. That's really important. That's how we clear the government budget constraint. We adjust that. I'm sorry? Yes, it does. But that's really important. because I mean that's one way. So we had a previous way we actually had various previous ways of clearing the budget constraint. One was lump sum taxation or lump sum transfers, but that affected affected the experiment that we were doing, essentially because because
Sounds better than G.
Okay, so there are two things here. One is whether in the data, GRY has gone up, and I think it did go up.
it didn't. No. I don't think did it go up? Government consumption in the US?
Maybe not G transfers.
Yeah.
Okay. But the other is, but then if it didn't go up, then why do you increase it?
But we don't say we increase it. We use it to clear the budget constraint of the government.
You change product.
But you don't need to. Because if you don't, but then also G equal to 0, and then you redistribute tax revenues proportionally.
Yeah. What via lump sum transfer? Then
Some transfer scheme, and it doesn't have to be lump sum.
okay. I mean, we also cleared using the tax level.
That's my question. Are you changing GRY?
Yes, we are changing G over Y. So it is not, what I mean is not constant throughout these experiments. So that is what clears. Sorry? It is a way of clearing the budget constraint. So if,
Intervene. It
So-
seems that your problem comes from the fact that you have just the one parameter for progressivity.
Why don't you just
You are changing just one parameter, but you could change two parameters, the level and the progressivity.
Well, there are ways to control.
yeah,
You can write the tax functions that you have.
Exactly. So you have a tax function which has two parameters. One is
yeah,
progressive,
and we do.
and the other clears the budget.
Yes, and we do. Okay, 5 minutes. The answer is yes, we do. Yes, we do, and we did we had a version of the model where the level of taxes cleared the budget constraint.
Because I imagine G's a waste, right?
G is a waste.
So you look at welfare, but you're wasting more or less stuff.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. No, you're right. It's a good point. Sorry.
You could add waste to the utilitarian social.
Yeah, exactly.
They like that.
Yeah. Then you.
GRY separate.
Yeah, you're right.
the exercise and you redistributed the tax revenues. Why was that? Why don't you like that exercise?
Because lump sum taxation is super progressive.
No, but it could be a multiplicative.
But that's fine.
A multiplicative parameter and a power parameter. All you need is more than one parameter.
No, but I do have that.
Whatever.
I do have that. So it's just a way of because using the tax level to clear the budget constraint will change the steady state in 2015 when you do the prediction exercise. Well, because you don't have, zero taxes. I mean, I get the point. Yeah. I'm not 100% sure of that. It depends on a bunch of other parameters, but yes. Yeah, so I'm just going to finish this. So you've got basically what we find here is that the inequality channel is tilted towards flatter taxes, the uncertainty channel tilted towards flatter taxes, and the reason is the indirect redistribution thing that I mentioned at the beginning. So, and you see this on the left-hand side of the chart. You see that when you reduce theta 1, so that's progressivity, you're actually, so when you reduce theta 1, that is progressivity. When you have flat taxes, when you're reducing the marginal tax rates of the highest paid in the economy, everyone just, goes into the non-routine cognitive occupation because taxes are lower there, so let's go there. And what happens? The wages of those occupations drops by, in the extreme case, 20%. And the wages of all the others increase by from, 10 to 14%. And you see that that's what happens when you look at the right. You see that the employment shares by occupation, you see that the employment shares of the non-routine cognitive occupations goes up by a lot, and the other ones go down. And here's the thing where I said, look, only surgeons really want high progressive taxation, right? So this is the welfare function of each occupation that you have in the model. And you see that only the non-routine cognitive occupations really want you really want the progressive tax, because that keeps people out of that occupation and it raises their hourly wages. And this chart just to show you that really what's driving this is the investment-specific technological change, but we don't have time to go through all of that. And without occupational choice, results are much weaker. So if you remove occupational choice entirely from the model, what you get is exactly the opposite result in terms of occupations wanting progressive taxation. So non-routine cognitive occupations want as low progressivity as is available, while all the others want more progressivity than you have in the data. So yeah, that's all I had to say. Yeah. Please.
Elasticity of these across occupations is pinned down by the Gambo shocks, or
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
the elasticity across occupations.
Across occupations. So between
What makes me respond to a change in my wage?
yes,
The Gambo shock
the parameters of the Gumbel shock distribution. Yes,
variance in particular.
the variance. Yes,
And how is that pinned down?
that's pinned out by looking at the shares in 2015. So you start. This takes time. So here's how this works. No, so the parameters that control this. Basically, what we do is we start with a model where there's no occupational choice. You just force a number of people to go to each of the occupations such that you match the shares exactly. Okay, so then you obtain the value functions, and then you go to the occupational choice model, right? You go to the occupational choice model where you've got something which you now know, which is the value functions of joining each of these occupations, which you got from the model without occupational choice. And the only thing that you need to care about is the scale parameter of the Gumbel shocks. The scale parameter of the Gumbel shocks. And this comes directly from McFadden's multinomial choice model. And then you calibrate that scale parameter such that you get the shares that are consistent with the value functions that you got from the model without occupational choice. The variance parameter is constant across all of the occupations. Across.
Drives the elasticity, no?
That's not the assumption that McFadden does in his model, but I get your point that this is a two-parameter. Each distribution has two parameters: scale and variance. But basically what we do is we fix the variance parameter, which is exactly the same that he does in his model.
But it seems like here it's important for the result because it drives how much I respond in the end.
Yeah.
These are the costs essentially, right? They're kind of like cost shocks. So when the benefits change, how much I respond depends on both of these parameters.
I agree.
Actually, I'm more on the variance.
That I don't know. I can't answer that question. But there's definitely a parameter that we don't pin down. So we just set that parameter
But
to.
you move along the distribution of shocks as the mean benefits.
Yeah. So the variance. So you just you have to think of this. So the way we set it up is basically you have four distributions. Each of them are overlapping and they move around as you. Yeah. I agree. I agree. I agree. I agree. I agree.
Okay, let's stop there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.